Hi, everyone. I'm attorney Donna DiMaggio Berger, and this is Take It to the Board, where we speak condo and HOA. Thanks for joining us for the second part of my episode with Professor Marcia Narine Weldon. You won't want to miss what else she has to say about how you can protect your mental well-being as both an association attorney or a board member or manager while navigating the daily challenges of serving your community association. So speaking of shared characteristics, I had read a report years ago that attorneys have a lot of shared characteristics in terms of their mindset, their perspective. My question is this: does the legal profession attract a certain type of perhaps unhappy person, or does the profession create a certain amount of unhappiness or pessimism?
So I have strong views on this because, I deal with people before they become lawyers all the way till the time they say, I will never practice law again. And I always ask my law students why they choose to go to law school. There's a whole group of people who have no idea, right? They're just hiding out because there's a recession. They figure for 3 years, by the time I get out of my job market, it's going to be better. There's a bunch of people whose family members are lawyers, so they've got to do it. But most people, and some people do it for the money, and then they realize it's not that much money. I mean, it's a lot of money compared to everybody else, but not compared to the law school debt. Most people that go to, they really want to help people. They want to make the world better. I think the profession attracts hopeful people. And the reason that people are so unhappy, so despondent, so disengaged in the profession is that they don't feel significance and they don't feel a sense of purpose. So you can find somebody who's working really, really hard. I have some coaching clients I work in, like they're billing 80, 90 hours a week, consistently. They love what they do. They're not the ones that are saying, I just want to get away from my kids and my wife, so I'm going to work all day long in a team. Like, they love it. It energizes them. If you were to say, please go on vacation, they would rather stick a needle in their eye. There's that people, but most of the people are not like that. First of all, law school doesn't really prepare you for what the practice is going to be like. My classes do, but most classes don't, right? And then when they get to I didn't think it was going to be like this. I thought it was going to be like what I saw on Suits or what I saw on all these other shows. And it's a completely different view. So I think the profession itself is broken with, things like the billable hour, which of course, if you do, and I say not because I say that, but because the American Lawyer Media they do a survey every year on lawyer unhappiness and mental health. And I think 70-something%, I looked at the statistics, said that part of the reason for their unhappiness and their misery and their stress is because of the billable hour. So that's, I think, one of the big issues. The profession is what changes people. And 76% of lawyers blame their work environment for their emotional and mental health problems. 76% of the lawyers. 68% cited billable hour pressures.
I also think it's an uneasy fit if you take somebody who's creative and now put them in the legal industry. I look at, and I've got, my sister's an artist. We've got creatives in the family and friends who are creatives. Those people, like you said, they could be working 90, 120 hours a week, but they're so engaged and they're in the flow when they're working.
In flow. They're in the flow state. Exactly.
They're in flow. You may have already guessed through our conversation today that this is my outlet as an attorney, having this podcast, having on guests where I'm just curious. And I have such a great time talking to people. But what do rank and file attorneys do when they're looking for that kind of outlet? They're creative people, but they're expected, as you said, to comply with the billing pad and everything else. Where do they find that outlet?
It's so funny you mentioned this because I have 3 other lawyer friends who recently started podcasts. I'm like, how do you have the time? They said, this is my happiest time of the week. And what it means is you have to find what makes you happy. I have 20 adjunct professors that report to me at University of Miami in their transactional skills program. One of them is the chief legal officer for a major company and the chief administrative officer, right? They're buying things, they're acquiring things. And I said, and she volunteered to teach over the summer. I said, don't you want to break? She goes, this is my happiest because I'm giving back, right? So whatever it is, for some people, it might be playing the piano. For some people, it might be becoming yoga instructors for other lawyers like that. So what I'm finding is good is that lawyers are less afraid to show a side of themselves that they didn't show before. So I started my podcast because, I have little time, but I love talking to people. I love learning. I love exposing people to that, right? You're finding more lawyers becoming kind of quote content creators, where they're doing things on TikTok or Instagram, or they're that kind of, partly because it allows them to be creative. And we need creative lawyers because you have to have that creative outlet so that your brain can think of creative solutions to the business problems that you're dealing with. So you may not think there's a connection, right? But there's a reason that some of my friends who play music, when they're saying they're playing the piano the solution comes to them, right? Because music, by the way, has lots of logic and math to it. So whatever it is, maybe it's painting. If we get away, and I tell my students in my coaching classes all the time, you have a really big thorny problem you're really struggling with, and you're just whatever, and get away from it, do something totally different, something that you love. And then sometimes that's when the idea will come. So everybody should find an outlet.
Do you think the legal consumers are open to seeing us as real people who have real lives, as opposed to just their counselor when they call us when they have a problem?
I started posting what I call like more woo-woo content on LinkedIn probably last year, a couple of years ago. And it was striking. So sometimes I would post something about some important legal development that I thought my audience should know. Mm-hmm. Crickets. I'd post something about like, I got a tattoo and whatever, 100 likes plus comments, right? I posted, one of my coaching clients she's a marketer, right? And I work with her company. And I I did ayahuasca in Peru when I went to do Machu Picchu, right? Which is plant medicine. And it was part of my doing something scary, because there's nothing scarier for a lawyer than having shamans yell at you for hours when there's bats flying around in a hut in Peru in the Amazon, and you don't know if you're going to ever come back sane, right? That was my scariest thing I ever did. But I said, I'm going to post about it on LinkedIn. She's like, no, it will destroy your brand. So I posted about it, talking about, my brand is being authentic, all this kind of stuff. The amount of lawyers who reached out to me in my direct messages, oh, have you also tried peyote? Have you done this? How many ceremonies? I was like, who are you people, right? And these are partners in major law firms that you would know. These are general counsels. And I said, why don't you comment? Oh, I could never put that out there. And I understand that, right? Because not everybody's going to be like a renegade,
right.
Be authentic, be yourself. Because people are like, I don't think my board member wants to know about this. But I think people want to work with people they know, like, and trust. Legal consumers as well. If I am a regular layperson, I want to make sure that my lawyer is going to speak to me in a way that I don't feel stupid. I want to feel like some connection. By definition, they assume you already know the legal stuff. But can you relate to me? Because if I feel like my lawyer is way up here, and I know your listeners can't see my hand, but way up here above me.
It's above my head.
It's above my head. And I'm to feel too stupid to ask my lawyer a question, I'm not going to ask, which means I'm not going to comply with whatever the rule is. So everybody, we need that level of connection. We need to know this lawyer is a human being. We need to know this lawyer makes mistakes. So even for your lawyers who are listening to the podcast, let your associates know when you've made a mistake. Let your associates know that you've been scared, because the only way that they can come to you when they're scared or they make a mistake is they feel it's okay. Because otherwise they're going to have that crippling fear. They're going to cut corners. They're not going to tell you when something is wrong because they don't see you as a person that they can relate to.
When I started out, it's great advice. I had a mentor. He was a 90-year-old attorney in a little boutique firm in downtown Miami. It was a banking law firm. And his name was Morris. And he told me, listen, 99% of mistakes could be corrected if you fess up early on. But if you don't, and you bury it, we're not going to be able to fix it. And we've all made those mistakes. And I've told associates here, don't feel stupid. We've all made those mistakes, and let us know, and we can certainly correct it. But towards that end, that actually is a great segue into my next question, which is, listen, most law firms, we're in the business of making money as well. Correct. And it's an inherently competitive environment. It may be changing. We'd like to think it's a collaborative environment, but it can be very competitive. It can be competitive in terms of who's billing the most hours, who's going to make partner, who's originating the most work. Do you think that just even the very nature of law as a business creates unhappiness or the potential for unhappiness?
I think so, right? Because every profession is competitive, but I don't know if it's a competition, because, by the way, most lawyers are competitive in general. They're the people, and I think this is a terrible reason to go to law school, but they're the people whose parents said, oh my gosh, you argue so much, you should be a great lawyer, right? That's not the definition of you can argue with people and you can convince people of anything is not the qualification to be a lawyer, right? No. But there is that competition, there is that winning, because they were often in the debate thing. When they're in law school, you have to go through moot court or oral argument. Even if you do transactional stuff and your first legal writing, then you have to so we get used to being competitive. The deal lawyers, it's more collaborative, but they still have to represent their clients. There's still a little bit of a competition. And litigators, of course, by definition, is competitive. I don't know that that's the part that leads to the unhappiness, to be honest. I really think it's the lack of a connection to the work. I really think that many lawyers, I think a lot of law is just not that interesting, to be perfectly honest. It really isn't. A lot of law is, by the way, I'm 31 years practicing. I have been a happy lawyer for 31 years, all 31 years. I am a unicorn in that I have loved every legal job I ever had. I am the exception, and I can find something interesting in anything. I'm that person that, and I recommend this to young lawyers all the time, especially in economic times like this, to be the I'll do that person, right? To have that growth mindset. When you listed off all those jobs in the beginning, it's because, oh, somebody needs to be a chief privacy officer. I'll do that. Somebody needs to learn this. I'll do that. So I never got bored, and I always felt some level, because I was always learning a new skill, which has stood me in great stead, because it's hard to fire me. It's like, all right, she's the only one that could do these 15 things, so we'll keep her. She's cheaper than hiring 14 more people, right? So when we feel, if you're a lifelong learner, if you have that growth mindset of, I don't know how to do this now, I don't know how to do this yet, but I can learn it, that can add more satisfaction. Because if you're an M&A lawyer right now, you're kind of bored. And so, I mean, there's mergers and acquisitions work going on, but not as much. But if you have that, plus say, something I'd like to learn about privacy, or I want to learn about community associations. If you have that chance in the firm, even if you don't bill for that time, if you're building up those skills for the intrinsic desire to be a better lawyer, that can help, again, with your level of job satisfaction. And it also can prepare you for the next job, if that's what you choose to do, or the next role.
It's great advice. It's funny, for many years, I never did mediations. Okay. So I represent community associations, but I said, you know what? I'd actually like to do a little bit of that. So, I agree with you. I had a conversation with an associate today, and he asked me, don't we have an expert in the firm who does this? And I said, we do, and you should work with her, but you should also dig into this yourself. Okay. You're an associate. You're going to want to build up your skills across a variety of different areas. And then later you can delegate. And he said, you know what, that makes sense. And I said, we'll work with you. I got another great piece of advice, which was to ask associates on a scale of 1 to 10, how uncomfortable are you with this task? Be honest. If it's, I'm a 10 uncomfortable, then, maybe we're not going to give you that task right now. But if you're a 2 or 3 uncomfortable, or 4, I think maybe you should tackle that. But it is good to know how uncomfortable they really are with a specific task.
That is so great. And I hope that and I'm going to start doing that too, right? Because I think we assume, all right, you're graduating from law school, you're at the firm, you're a third year, you can do this, or you can learn this. And there's some people, who really struggle with anything new. There's some people that all that advice I just gave a few minutes ago was completely never going to follow it. They're like, no, I know how to do this law. I'm doing it for 20 years. It ain't broke. Why would I do anything different about it? I am an expert. I don't want to learn anything new. And that can be very comforting to people, because the idea of trying to learn a whole new area of law, or expand and possibly, quote, fail, right, or not be an expert at it right away, is terrifying to some people, right? And that's why you have that kind of fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. The fixed mindset of, I know how to do this, and I don't have to put forth a lot of effort, and I can do this. It comes so naturally to me. I'm not going to change. Those are people who are terrified to fail. They're not going to try new things. And as some companies and law firms become more lean, and you need to do more with less, you need to have people who are willing to expand and do things that they aren't comfortable with. But I think asking the comfort level and what might help get you more comfortable. It might be, I'm uncomfortable because I just never did this before. Right. It might be, I'm uncomfortable because, Donna, I love working with you because you're a really great lawyer and mentor. But if I got to work with this guy, I don't care if I know it backwards and forwards. He just makes me uncomfortable. Right. So the next question I would ask is, why are you uncomfortable? Is it a skill level, a knowledge level, a personal thing? And then what can make us get more comfortable? And again, that goes back to what we talked about in the beginning. People just want to be heard. They want to know that their voices matter. And just by asking those kinds of questions, you're going to go so long in the retention and the engagement of your associates, because that's what firms are worried about right now.
And I never even thought to do that until the coach mentioned it. In the past, you would just say, oh, yeah, this is what I went through as an associate. So yeah, here's your file. Here's what you're doing. Let me know if you have any questions, as opposed to saying, here's what the work request is. How comfortable do you feel? If I'm hearing you correctly, Marcia, fixed mindset is pretty much somebody with a comfort zone. Here's my comfort zone, right?
It's a thought of that. It's like that your intelligence is fixed like your eye color. Like you can't do I grew up the whole time. I thought I was terrible at math. I was like, I don't do math. Literally, that's why I'm in law school. There was no math on the LSAT. That's why I went to Columbia undergrad. There was no math requirement to graduate. Literally, because I grew up my whole life like, I can't. But my parents from the Caribbean, like, you could do anything you want. So that was the growth mindset. But I went in class, my teachers were like, well, math just isn't your thing. You're everything else but math. So
and that happened to a lot of women. That happened to a lot of women.
Math is not your thing, right? So then you start to believe it. So the growth mindset is, all right, I just don't know how to do this yet. I'll learn. And if I fail, I'll just take what I've learned, what I've learned from the quote failure, and continue. The brain scans of people with growth and fixed mindsets, when they're asked certain questions, actually looks different on an MRI, because they can actually see different parts of the brain light up. When you tell the person with the growth mindset, you didn't do well, this is what you could do to get better, that part of that brain lights up. The person with the fixed mindset, and they determine by asking them a series of questions. And people can be fixed mindset on one thing and growth mindset on another. It's not stuck, right? But the fixed mindset, their brains don't light up in that same way. That's really important for businesses. If you have somebody with a fixed mindset people tend to believe that they're naturally good at it, so they don't have to put any effort toward it, and they don't respect effort. So they will say, math is my thing. I'm going to be an engineer. Oh, you need somebody to learn this? That's not me. The growth mindset person might say, math really is never my thing, but I'm going to keep learning, and I'm going to keep learning till I get it. That's the employee you want, because that's the person that when you have to change roles, or somebody's got to be a pinch hitter, or somebody goes on family leave and needs somebody else to deal with that person is the one that's more likely to say, oh, I've never met that client before, but you need me to do it? Okay. Or I need to learn this new area, or that's good. That's what you want. You don't want to reward the person who says, I'm good at this. This is all I'm doing. And which is why for parents that are listening, every parent has done this. You're a genius. You're amazing. You don't even have to try, right? And so like, I am a genius. I don't have to try. That person's not going to try a lot. If you reward your kids, and same thing with your associates based on effort, I can see how much effort you put into that. That again is going to train the brain that effort is the reward. And those people are going to end up doing better because they're going to keep trying till they get it right. The person who thinks they are a natural genius at this, if they don't get it right, they're like, that's just not my thing, and I'm not going to try any harder. So parenting tip, which of course I learned this, my kid's 27, I should have known this a long time ago, right? Because I was like, art is my thing. I don't do anything else. I'm like, oh no, right? But focus on the effort, hey, I did this, something, actually your deliverable is X, you didn't quite meet it, but I can see how much effort you put into it. Let's go ahead and try again. That growth mindset person, like, all right, that fixed mindset person is traumatized. That's the person that gets the B+ when they're a straight A student and they cannot function. And you don't want that in your firm.
So speaking of firms, how many firms, and I'm talking about firms, let's say, not talking about sole proprietors, we're talking about firms, let's say 10 lawyers and up. How many of them do you think have a real balance in terms of their attorneys with growth mindsets versus fixed mindsets? From what I'm hearing you say, and I'm thinking of the firms I've worked at, I think there's more fixed mindsets in the industry than growth. Am I right in that assumption?
The law will attract fixed mindset people, because again, the whole time you're growing up, you're so smart, you're so bright, you're so talented, that kind of thing, which again, as parents, like, oh, of course I want them to have great self-esteem. We do that, but if we don't say, and you try so hard, I love to see how you work. So organizations can have a fixed mindset. The organization that has a fixed mindset is going to may not promote from within it, because it's going to focus on promoting only the same kind of people and not expanding, right? They may not be amenable to outside voices or outside opinions, because like, this is the way it's got to be. This is how we've always done it. Why would we change? And as this profession is changing at the speed of light, the speed of molasses in some areas and the speed of light in other areas, right? That doesn't work.
Are law schools turning out graduates with a growth mindset?
It's not
your job.
That's law students. It is our job. It is our job, because by the time they get to the firm, nobody's training them, right? So they're like, they expect us to train on everything, and that doesn't always happen. I don't think we put enough attention to this, of focusing on mindset in terms of, and I try to do it with my students, right? And I have these conversations with them, like, this is not a failure. This is, what can we learn from this, right? I tell people to keep a failure file. Something didn't work out well. What didn't I do right? And how can I learn from it, right? Athletes, when they don't win the game, they watch over and over again. They watch the tape to see how they can improve. You can't be an elite athlete with a fixed mindset. By definition, you're not going to win all the time, and you have to continue to try. Right. So a lot of times I think people who play sports who know that at some point somebody has to lose, you know, it might be 0.001 of a second, but somebody's got to come in second. That's a good thing, right? Because you learn like, all right, I'm going to pick myself up. I'm going to try again.
I want to talk about shedding stress. We've got a few minutes left, and I want to give you a snapshot into the typical community association lawyer's life, which is a lot of times we're now in the summer, but come fall and winter is election season, where you've got your annual membership meeting. You've got a lot more board meetings. Of course, down here now we also have a lot of communities that are accelerating repair projects and replacement projects to meet those deadlines I talked about with the new law. So we go out to these meetings at night. Okay, so you've been in the office. Now you might miss dinner, or you grab something on the road, you head over to the client's community, you're sitting in the board meeting, or it could be on Zoom, but it could be in person, and you're just bombarded with a toxic stew of people yelling at each other and making accusations, and you're trying to navigate this. And, as counsel, you're being asked to weigh in on a variety of issues. You leave the meeting and you just feel completely depleted. And sometimes it starts all over again the next day. Any recommendations on how to kind of walk out of that meeting and shed it a little bit?
So your listeners may not want to hear this, right? The number one thing that has helped me with this issue is developing a mindfulness practice, which does not mean that they have to sit on a cushion with lotus flowers and chant, which I do. Okay, but they don't have to do that. But you can develop, and there's apps and those kinds of things, because here's what it helps you do. It helps you, number one, stay in the present. Number two, it helps you detach from the outcome. Not in a callous, I don't care, do what you want, but okay, that's not going to affect me in the same kind of way, right? And it also, again, helps you respond versus react. So I used to be an employment lawyer on the defense side, dealing with some pretty schlocky, unethical plaintiffs' counsel. And I would have like high blood pressure, migraines after every conversation. I'd have to sit there and send a note. This is to confirm that you agreed to an enlargement of, like, we just got the phone. Why do I, aren't you an honorable human being? But then I was like, let me detach from this. Right? What is the worst thing that's going to happen? And when we deal with, and I know that this mindfulness, detaching from the outcome, the breathing, all the different things work because, in the human rights field, I deal with people whose family members have been killed, and I can't, or disappeared by governments, or, their family members were shot by special security forces protecting corporations. You can't leave that and not have it stick to you. Right?
You're human.
But you could be compassionate and you could be empathetic without it becoming your life. Another thing, in terms of just to not keep that whole toxic anger kind of thing, is I tell people, think about, the 5 test, right? Is it going to matter 5 hours from now, 5 weeks from now, 5 months from now, 5 years from now? I can be agitated and angry, but if tomorrow I'm not even going to remember it, why am I going to stress about it? Now, if it's a huge thing, this law is going to change and wipe out my livelihood, then yes, I should really be focused on it. And then, just really think about, what is holding on to this bringing to me? We don't want to get so tied up that we are a less effective lawyer. There is a reason that lawyers have among the highest rates of suicide, addiction, depression, those kinds of things. And we don't need to exacerbate it, which comes just from the way the profession is structured. We don't need to make it worse by bringing on our clients' toxicity to us. So there are things that people can do. It takes work, but I know it works. I don't ever recommend anything that I haven't done.
Can we ask ourselves, Marcia, what's the easiest thing I can do in this situation? Or is that cutting corners?
Absolutely. No, I don't think it's cutting corners. I think people that do whatever works for them, right? So lawyers, by definition, our job is to think of all the terrible things that can happen. At some point, we need to sit thinking about, okay, what's the best thing that can happen? Right. Or also thinking, we have sometimes these negative thoughts that come and flood us, right? There's a great, Byron Katie has this thing called The Work, and you ask yourself, is this true? Right? How do I know this is true? And what's my evidence? Because sometimes we will sit there and catastrophize when something is not really going to happen. Another thing is, I was like, I'm going to fail the bar exam. I don't ever say, no, you won't, because, they could, right? So I say, I want you to go through this. Is it possible? Yes, it is possible you're going to fail the bar exam. Is it likely? Probably not. Is it probable? No. And if you do that, whatever it is, whatever kind of thing that's coming and flooding you, that's keeping you kind of like stuck in this level of these, like what they call them, the ants, the automatic negative thoughts that we are hardwired to have to protect ourselves. Asking ourselves the questions: is it true? What's our evidence? Is it likely? Is it possible? Is it probable? Right? But always, what is the evidence? That, when you continue to do that day after day, like exercising, like you do your sit-ups, again, is training your brain so that when those things happen, when that toxicity, when that argument happens, when that catastrophizing happens, your brain's like, then our default is the other thing. Our default is what's the best that can happen. Now, of course, we have to think of the worst that can happen. Otherwise, people wouldn't pay us. But we can't dwell in that, right?
I wish I'd talked to you back when my husband and I both went to University of Miami Law School. We were engaged our third year. And when we were taking the bar, we hadn't really thought about the fact that we had planned our wedding in February. We were taking the bar in July, and we said, you know what, if one of us doesn't pass, or both of us, we'll be honeymooning in Tampa, not in Hawaii. Fortunately, actually, he wound up getting the number one score on the bar in the third DCA.
Congratulations.
And I did pretty well. So you have done so much. What has been, if you don't mind me asking, your most stressful job?
I worked in Macy's Herald Square, 34th Street, which is the largest Macy's in the world. Right?
I know it. Yep.
And I worked selling handbags on the first floor when I was in college, when I was also taking summer classes because I wanted to graduate early. And, every lawyer should work in customer service in retail, because you really learn to you talk about like toxicity and obnoxious people, so and then like I had the backstabbing with like people at the commission. Like the second day I was there, I got the highest commission they had seen for the month. I was like, how hard is this? And then I led to, so I was like, so it was really helpful for life in a firm, life every place else, but it was hard because you're dealing with customers. You got to make sure no money goes missing. You got to look for the shoplifters. There's like too much stuff. And I wasn't passionate about it. I wanted to make money. So anything that I am super passionate about, I will love.
It was a job,
I always tell people, do what you love.
Yep.
The money will follow. Because some people have a job, some people have a career, and some people have a calling. I'm lucky that every single thing I do is part of my calling. Most people don't have that. The selling handbags at Macy's was a job. And it was stressful because I did really well, and that brought out a lot of jealousy. I could sell a handbag.
I was not expecting that answer, but it's newfound respect to the people working in the handbag department at Macy's and every other department store. Part of the stress and anxiety I'm feeling, and I talk to my colleagues about it as well, is that we're expected to be available 24/7 now. 24/7. I've had clients actually text me, because I give them my cell number, and most clients do not abuse it. Text me to say, there's an email in your inbox I sent you 10 minutes ago. I'm waiting for a reply. How do we, Marcia, kind of navigate that, especially when we know our competitors? So sometimes clients will say, well, our other lawyer, I can reach him or her 24/7. Are we entitled to take a vacation? Are we entitled to have doctor appointments and lives and have to pick up our kids and other issues? Or are we tethered to our devices? Is it creating a level of insecurity in our profession?
So I believe that in work and in life, people treat us the way we train them, right? And I have been that in-house lawyer who has had to work on Christmas Eve and trying to reach people in Latin America, and they act like I'm insane. Like, under what circumstance would you think it's appropriate to reach out to me? Like, we gotta close, right? I've also had the outside counsel that when I've sent an email saying, hey, Marcia, my wife is in labor. As soon as she's in, I'll give you a call back. Like, no, what's wrong with you? Right? It was like, that is not how and I have been that 24/7 person that took a business call in the Great Wall of China, where I got better reception than I do in Miami. However, right, we have to set the boundaries. And I know it's easier said than done, but we have to sit there. And I think when it goes to the values, right, as a lawyer, you have to think about what is really important to you. Some people, family time is not important to them, right? We should not assume that people want to spend time with their families. Some people hate their families. Some people would prefer to work all day long, but most people would like to have some kind of personal life. And I think we have to think about like a quadrant. Some things are important. It has to be done. But it may not be urgent, which has to be done now. And you may not have to do it. A lot of times, like, I alone can do it. Now, your client might say, but I hired you, Donna, and you alone can do it. That's true. But sometimes if it's a new client relationship, we kind of set out some of the parameters. And if it's an existing client, say, you know something, I am at my best when I'm rested and refreshed. And I'm happy to be there for you if there's an emergency. If there's a raid of your offices, call me right now. If you are on death row and are waiting for a pardon from the governor, I am there 24/7. But very few legal things, right? And I say this as somebody who has been that lawyer. I got trained in New York law firms where I would be answering emails from partners at 3 a.m. And I now have to tell people, because that's in my conditioning, I now have to tell people, if I send you an email at 3 a.m. because I'm up, that's just what I'm thinking about. I don't expect a response, because some clients, other than the one that called you and said, XYZ, some clients will just send things when they're busy because they have so many things going on. So like, I happen to be up, let me just send this. Donna will respond when she can. We as lawyers, though, in our zest to please and be a zealous advocate, will respond right away. The more you respond to the email on the Sunday from church or, from your kid's birthday party, then they'll be like, I guess it's okay because Donna keeps responding. So, make sure that you think of that quadrant. Is it important? Is it urgent? And do I have to do it? And when you start doing that, it's hard. First time you push back on a client, they may not like it, but I guarantee you they'll respect it. And if they don't, that may not be the client you want. I say this now, you're like, really? Because we need that client. And so, but you have to, everybody's got to, I don't want your listeners to think like I'm completely crazy, right? I also practice law. I also have bills to pay, right? But at some point, let's think about the profession. Why do 71% of lawyers think there's a mental health crisis? Because we don't have the boundaries, because we give everything to our clients, everything to the law. We don't always get that return that we want emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally. And then we burn out. We have that chronic stress. We're burnt out. We don't want to get out of bed. We don't want to function. Or we do anything, and we can't meet our ethical duty of competence if we are not at our best. So when you don't have those boundaries, when you allow clients to run all over you, right? And associates, when you allow the partners to run all over you with unreasonable deadlines. I have a coaching client the partner called her right after her grandfather's funeral. You said the funeral was at 12, right? It's 3. I just have a question. First of all, I said, why did you answer the phone? Well, the partner was coming, but she's a second-year associate. So of course she's going to answer that phone, right?
Yeah.
But at some point, we have to tell people that's not cool.
Set a boundary.
It's the tone of the top.
Yep.
You got to set that boundary.
You've just said so many things that resonate with me. First of all, not every loss is a bad loss. So in my opinion, attorneys need to know if this relationship with this client's not working out, if they're not listening, if you have concerns about their ethics, if you don't think they're, following your advice, but also if they're not respecting your boundaries. My husband a few weeks ago had an emergency appendectomy. I was, dealing with him not only in the hospital, but then for some aftercare. And a client called, it was actually the client's manager, and said, we haven't had a response in 3 days. And it wasn't an emergency. It was nothing to do with an emergency. They said, we're not feeling valued. And I said, we've been working together for a decade. And if you're going to define the relationship on the basis of a 3-day delay that was caused by a family emergency I had, then I don't think we should continue working together. And that's the type of, I can say that at my level. Okay. I'm a partner. Right. I'm seasoned. I'm same thing. I'm at 31 years in practice. Yeah. It's a lot different than an associate who creates those boundaries. So that really landed with me, that those expectations with the clients are sometimes incredibly unreasonable. And not every loss of a client's a bad loss. But I'm also laughing because one of my colleagues, the way I may interact with my clients can have a negative impact on a colleague's interaction with that same client. I'm a night owl. So I will be sending emails at 2:30 in the morning. And then when I have to hand off because I'm not a litigator, hand it off to a litigator. One of my litigation colleagues said, Donna, you are creating very bad habits. You need to tee up the email and then schedule it to go out during normal working hours, because they would say to him, what? Yeah. Donna's sending us responses at 2 a.m. Why we haven't heard, we only hear from you between 8 and 5:30. So, that was eye-opening for me as well, because maybe the way I'm relating and being 24/7 can have a negative impact when one of my colleagues now has to step in and do work with that client.
Yeah, but I want to also add something you said about the family emergency. Let's flip it to the other side. I think people are generally much more understanding than we would think if we just tell them what's going on. Right? I have had two very ill parents over the past year. My dad's in hospice. My mother just finished chemotherapy, and I missed a lot of deadlines. And without fail, when I would tell somebody, hey, I'm not going to be able to do this commitment, or I have to cancel this appearance, or I have to do X, Y, Z, without fail, people were understanding. And they would literally say things like, oh, I know my dad was in hospice too last year. I get it. You'd be, now, again, some people are totally unreasonable, but you'd be surprised. And as lawyers, we don't want to be vulnerable, right? We are the ones, we solve the problems. Here I am to save the day, right? It doesn't matter what's happening. I am impermeable, but that's a problem, right? We sometimes put this on ourselves. What if we just said, you know something, I need 2 extra days. I've got some stuff going on. And I don't tell people that they have to be super explicit. I was, and I posted on LinkedIn because I want to give people the ability to say what's happening. And I have had so many students or young lawyers come up to me and say, thank you so much for being open and vulnerable. Because again, they will never trust you when something is wrong if you don't let them know you have struggled too. I'm going to miss this deadline, or I have to change this deadline because I've been, dealing with my mom's oncologist, so X, Y, Z. Then they can come to me. If it's not time sensitive and, then give an extension. We have to give each other grace. We started doing that during COVID. And now we're I think worse than we were before, right? And that's something we should think about.
That's such good advice. And the example I gave, I did tell that client. I said, look, here's what I was dealing with. And then they said, oh, we're sorry. And it's not an issue, but you're right. By the way, I have my dad's going to be 94 on August 1st.
Wow.
And my mom's 90. Good luck to your parents. I'm right. Again, we're on parallel paths here. I'm right there with you. So I would say, I want to wrap up, and you've been so generous with your time. On top of all the things we have to worry about, how far up the list should artificial intelligence be? And this has
to be the subject of another podcast, because that is number of the things that lawyers should be thinking about. The mental health and the progression of the profession is number 1, and AI is a strong number 2. I just came back from Lisbon talking about artificial intelligence. That's what I'm doing my summer research on, is artificial intelligence, business issues and legal issues with generative AI and other kinds of things. And it is, there are going to be the lawyers that use AI as a tool and the lawyers who get left in the dust. But please don't use it as a tool and get fined $5,000 like that lawyer that used ChatGPT to cite cases that don't exist. Okay, please don't do that. But, and which is why DLA Piper and other major firms are building their own, their own programs. But for the lawyers, I want you guys to think about, your clients are going to ask you, well, if you can use AI and be much more efficient, then why don't you do that? But by the way, don't train the data sets with any of my privileged data, right? So lawyers and law firms really have to think about, how will they use artificial intelligence? How will they deal with the privilege issues, the privacy issues, and the accuracy issues?
And how's it going to impact billing?
Mean?
How do you impact
what
billing?
What does that mean? The billable hour is going to, at some point, we talk about the death of the billable hour since before I went to law school. I think this is what's going to actually be the trigger, because if I'm an in-house lawyer, first of all, when I was in-house, I didn't pay for the work of a first-year associate. I'm like, they can't do anything, right? Then you train them on your dime. My outside counsel guidelines are going to be, I want to know that you have, appropriate, protected, encrypted, supersonic, galactic artificial intelligence and I want my bills to go down dramatically. Because I'm thinking about, how am I going to teach my students about drafting contracts? And, World Economic Forum, the number 2 job they say is going to be affected by AI is legal.
Wow.
Legal is number 2.
What's number 1?
Last week. Oh, I can't remember. It was like office administrator, banking tellers or something like that.
I'm wondering about medical too, because, if you...
Medical's a whole other... I'm talking about this tomorrow to a healthcare company. I'm talking about AI and corporate governance and what it means to them tomorrow. So it is a big time. But I would say this again, like I said, literally the subject for a whole other podcast. It is not the time to stick your head in the sand, and it is not the time to be terrified. It is a time to get educated, to understand what the risks and benefits are to your business. But if you don't start to learn how to understand generative AI and the other things that are coming out, we will be left behind. There isn't a doubt.
Where we contribute.
On that happy note.
on that happy note, I'm going to track you down for a follow-up podcast episode devoted to artificial intelligence. Last question. You mentioned you have a podcast. Can you tell us where people can find you?
Sure. It's called Illuminating Wisdom, which is also the name of my coaching and corporate training firm. And I interview lawyers. I interview business people. I interview spiritual seekers. I just interview a hodgepodge of people. So the one that's going to come out today is actually by a lawyer who uses artificial intelligence, metaverse, and that kind of stuff. His name is Mitch Jackson. So that's the one that's going to come out today. So it's lawyers talking about the profession, but the future of the profession, but it's also just generally interesting, fascinating people. So I created a podcast that I'd want to listen to.
You're a kindred spirit.
Find on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, everywhere.
You got a kindred spirit here, and you got a new follower and subscriber in me. Again, I want to thank you so much, Marcia, for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to follow and rate us on your favorite podcast platform or visit takeittotheboard.com for more ways to connect.